Imagine you run a bakery and someone from another town starts selling cheaper cakes right outside your shop. You complain to the town mayor, who then charges that outsider a fee, a tariff, for every cake they sell. Now their cakes are more expensive, and yours become competitive again. That's basically what a tariff is: a tax on goods coming from outside, used to protect your own shop or, in this case, your country's industries. But while this sounds like a good idea for your business, what if people loved those cheaper cakes? Now everyone has to pay more, and not everyone's happy. That's how tariffs can backfire. Let's go back in time and turn dry economic history into human drama. The Navigation Acts. Imagine your parents telling you, "You can only sell your lemonade to us, and we'll decide the price." That's exactly how England treated its American colonies in the 1600s. Through a set of laws known as the Navigation Acts, the British government dictated that colonial goods could only be shipped on English vessels and sold in English ports. It was like England playing the role of a strict, controlling parent, keeping all the profit for itself. These acts weren't just about trade, they were about power. They helped England dominate global commerce and strengthen its navy. But for the colonies, the results were far less rosy. The rules choked off their ability to trade freely, stunted their economic growth, and blocked them from developing their own industries. Over time, frustration boiled over, helping to sow the seeds of rebellion. This was one of the earliest examples of how trade restrictions and tariffs can be used strategically, not just to protect domestic industries, but to enrich one nation at the expense of another. It sets a powerful precedent for the kind of protectionist playbooks we still see in modern geopolitics. The Corn Laws. Picture this. British farmers were scared. Cheap grain from other countries was flooding into the market, and they feared losing their livelihoods. So, the government stepped in and said, "No more cheap imports." They built a wall, not a physical one, but a tariff wall, to block foreign grain. It was like only allowing your apples to be sold at the market while banning cheaper ones from outside. This policy was called the Corn Laws, and it was designed to protect British farmers by taxing imported grain. At first, it worked. Farmers got some breathing room. But there was a catch. Food prices soared. For ordinary people, basic meals have become luxuries. Families struggled to put bread on the table. Protests and riots broke out across the country. What started to help farmers ended up hurting millions of consumers, especially the poor. Over time, the public outcry grew too loud to ignore. The laws were scrapped. The Corn Laws became a turning point in history, sparking fierce debates about free trade versus protectionism. They taught the world a hard lesson. Tariffs may protect one group, but they can also punish everyone else.
The Smoot-Hawley Tariff. Imagine this. It's the Great Depression. Millions of Americans are out of work and in debt. In a desperate move to save jobs, the U.S. government passes the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, slapping massive taxes on over 20,000 imported goods. The idea: make foreign products expensive so Americans would buy local. But here's where things go sideways. Other countries got angry, really angry. They fought back by raising their own tariffs on American goods. It turned into a global food fight, everyone throwing punches and everyone losing their lunch. The result? World trade collapsed by 66%. Yes, 66%. Instead of saving jobs, the tariffs made the economic crisis even worse. Countries stopped trading, industries stalled, and people everywhere suffered. Smoot-Hawley became the ultimate warning sign in economics textbooks, a perfect example of how aggressive protectionism can spiral into global chaos. It showed that in trying to protect your own economy, you might just hurt everyone, including yourself. Reagan versus Japan. Flashback to the 1980s. Japan was on fire. Not literally, but economically. They were shipping loads of cars and electronics into the U.S., and American industries were feeling the heat. U.S. automakers, especially, were losing ground to Japan's efficient and affordable imports. President Ronald Reagan stepped in with a classic defense move: tariffs and quotas on Japanese cars and semiconductors. The goal: give American industries some breathing room. But Japan didn't fight back with anger. They used a bit of economic judo. Instead of whining, Japanese companies said, "Okay, fine, we'll just build our factories in America." And they did. Toyota, Honda, and others started making cars on U.S. soil, employing American workers, and neatly sidestepping the import tariffs. It was a masterstroke. The result? America got new jobs, Japan kept selling cars, and the global supply chain quietly evolved. This episode is a classic example of how tariffs can force industries to adapt, sometimes leading to surprising and even mutually beneficial outcomes. It also shows how smart trade strategy can turn a challenge into an opportunity. Bush's steel tariffs in the early 2000s, the U.S. tried to give its struggling steel industry a boost. President George W. Bush slapped tariffs of up to 30% on imported steel, hoping to save jobs and reduce dependence on foreign supply. At first, it seemed like a win. American steel mills got a shot of adrenaline. But here's the twist. Steel isn't just a product. It's a building block for cars, buildings, appliances, and more. Industries that relied on steel, like automakers and construction companies, suddenly faced skyrocketing costs. Think of it like giving one kid a booster seat and then raising the height of the dinner table, so high that everyone else has to struggle to reach it. The unintended consequences? Higher prices, job losses in other sectors, and a competitive disadvantage for U.S. manufacturers. Eventually, pressure became too much and the tariffs were rolled back. This case is a textbook example of how trying to help one part of the economy can hurt many others, especially in a world where industries are deeply connected. Trump's Tariff 2018. In 2018, it felt like history hit rewind, but with a modern remix. President Donald Trump dusted off the old trade war playbook, shouting "America first." As he slapped tariffs on everything from steel and aluminum to washing machines and solar panels, his biggest move? A bold strike on $350 billion worth of Chinese goods? His claim? China's been cheating, stealing intellectual property, propping up its companies with subsidies, and playing unfair. For the first time in decades, the U.S. was back in a full-blown tariff war. But this time, the battlefield wasn't just about jobs and factories. It was about control, tech, and power. Then came President Joe Biden. Many thought he'd reverse course. Instead, he doubled down. By 2024 and 2025, Biden had not only kept most of Trump's tariffs, but expanded them especially on electric vehicles, semiconductors, and green technologies. The new buzzword? Strategic competition? Here's the twist. This wasn't your granddad's trade war. It wasn't just economics anymore. This time, it's about who leads in tech, who secures the supply chains of the future, and who sets the rules in a changing global order. Tariffs have officially graduated from dusty tax tools to weapons in a global power game. The new age of tariffs, trade weapon reloaded. 2025 edition tariffs aren't new. From England's Navigation Acts to the Smoot-Hawley Disaster, they've always been used to protect local industries. But what we're seeing in 2025? It's not just an economic tool. It's a precision weapon in a geopolitical chess match. Let's break it down. From blunt tools to laser precision. Old tariffs were like throwing a net into the ocean, catching everything whether it made sense or not. But today's tariffs? They're sniper shots. The U.S. is using data-driven targeting, calculating tariffs based on specific trade deficits. Countries like Lesotho, which barely trade with the U.S., are still facing 50% tariffs simply because they have an imbalance on paper. In contrast to the sweeping, one-size-fits-all policies of the past, tariffs today are algorithmic, customized, and weaponized. Example, rather than taxing all imports from a country, the U.S. might hit only electric vehicle batteries because that's where future dominance lies. Real-time trade wars in a digital world back in the day, trade policies moved at the pace of ships and paperwork. Now, it's real-time economics. Modern tariffs are adaptive. They use live data, economic modeling, and 90-day windows to allow rapid bilateral negotiations. Except China, which is facing 245% tariffs on key exports. We're no longer in an age of fixed protectionism. We're in an era of smart, flexible economic warfare. Global supply chains. One tariff, infinite ripples. In the 1930s, most goods were made and sold locally. If you blocked imports, it was mostly contained. Today, everything is connected. Your smartphone screen might come from South Korea, the chip from Taiwan, and the assembly from Vietnam. A single tariff can jam entire production lines, delay iPhone launches, or even derail electric vehicle rollouts. Tariffs today aren't just taxes. They're disruptors of global systems. Geopolitics over economics. The old tariff playbook was about jobs, prices, and factories. Now, it's about power. Under Trump, the message was America's getting cheated. Under Biden, it's strategic competition. Tariffs are no longer just economic tools. They're chess pieces in a new Cold War, especially between the US and China. This isn't about boosting GDP next quarter. It's about deciding who leads the world in AI chips and clean tech for the next 50 years. The forgotten players, developing economies while the big powers battle it out. Small and developing nations are getting hit hard. Countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America that rely on exports are facing disproportionate pain, sometimes over trade imbalances they barely contribute to. Much like during Smoot-Hawley, the ripple effect of protectionism is collateral damage in places with the least power to fight back. From colonial trade laws to 21st century tech wars, tariffs have always reflected the priorities of their time. But today's tariffs aren't just about economics. They're about control, code, chips, and climate. And as the lines between trade, tech, and geopolitics blur, the next global balance of power might just be decided not on the battlefield, but at the border through a customs duty.